There will be no opposition and likely no electoral reform when Dominica votes in December. When he stunned the nation on Sunday by announcing snap elections halfway into his term, Dominica's Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit spoke of the need to secure power for his party to ease its transition to new leadership with him no longer at the helm.
I want for the year 2023 to begin with a fresh mandate given to a fresh Labour team to commence the work of building post-COVID Dominica. With this in mind, today I wrote to His Excellency the President and advised he dissolves the current parliament of this country effective immediately. You have given me a mandate that constitutionally allows me to remain in office as your Prime Minister until April 2025. I do not intend to go beyond that date. I have run my race and I intend to finish the course, with Dominica safely back on a road of sustained progress and prosperity. That is why I am calling for a national reset.
That desire has now been all but fulfilled, as the United Workers' Party, the island's main opposition, has decided not to participate in a process they called, quote, an affront to our democracy and an insult. The UWP has yet to select a leader following the abrupt departure of Lennox Linton at the end of September. With elections not constitutionally due until April 2025, Dominicans might have been expecting the Prime Minister's Sunday address to focus on the devastating flash flooding and landslides that the day's heavy rains had visited on the island's east coast. Instead, he announced the dissolution of Parliament and the dates for the electoral exercise, a writ to be issued November 7th, nomination day to follow on November 18th, and election day itself on December 6th, exactly a month from Sunday's announcement. The Prime Minister, with 2.5 years left in his term, has seemingly decided to leave electoral reform by the wayside, while the public is awaiting the final report of Sir Dennis Byron's recommendations for such. The Prime Minister, in December 2019, in announcing the selection of the former President of the Caribbean Court of Justice and former Chief Justice of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court as the sole commissioner of the electoral reform efforts, had initially suggested that a final report could be submitted by December 2020. However, the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic threw a wrench into that process and delays crept in. The process began in earnest in February 2021, and according to a letter written by Sir Dennis to former UWP leader Lennox Linton, quote, consultation took longer than anticipated as it was characterized by robust discussion, with draft legislation being modified more than once until it met with the approval of the Electoral Commission. That letter was dated November 6th, the same day the Prime Minister announced the snap election, and was copied to Duncan Stowe, the chair of the Electoral Commission. In the missive, to which Sir Dennis attached draft copies of legislation to reform the voter registration process, the jurist indicated that he would be ready to present his long-awaited report in phases, with the first phase anticipated to be ready this month, dealing with voter registration. The second part of the report, focusing on the election process itself, Sir Dennis anticipated would be ready in February or March of next year following consultations. Sir Dennis, in his Sunday letter, also detailed a timeline he thought would be appropriate, in keeping with Skerrit's pledge, according to Dominica News Online, to promptly legislate the reforms suggested in the report. The eminent jurist envisioned the passage of the draft voter registration legislation in Parliament by January 2023, and the passage of draft legislation emanating from Phase 2 of his report by April 2023. This timeline, of course, has now been thrown into serious question, to say the least, by the Prime Minister's surprise election announcement. A central point of contention in the entire electoral reform discussion was a cleanup of the voters list, which critics say contains outdated information, including the names of long-deceased citizens and those who have moved overseas beyond the time frame afforded to maintain residency requirements. Reports of the election's observer missions from the Commonwealth and the Organization of American States from the 2019 electoral exercise spoke of the urgent need to address some of these long-standing issues surrounding the electoral process, including the issuance of government identification cards and to harness modern technology to aid in the ballot counting and tabulation process. Even members of the Caribbean Court of Justice judicial panel, who denied the appeal of the plaintiffs in 10 elections petitions dismissed by a lower court following the 2019 elections, spoke words of concern over the manner in which the poll was conducted. CCJ President Justice Adrian Saunders, in his judgment, expressed hope that Dominican authorities would reflect on the allegations made by the appellants and, quote, consider whether there are steps that can or should be made to improve the elections machinery. That, Justice Saunders said, would reduce the likelihood that such allegations, which he characterized as serious, would occur in the future. Quote, there remain areas of grave concern about how the process of these elections was conducted, wrote Justice Peter Jamadar in his judgment. Future elections in Dominica, he said, ought not to proceed with these or similar taints. Those comments were slammed by the Skerritt administration, which in a statement called them, quote, gratuitous commentary on political affairs. It is the lack of these reformative steps which the UWP says has led it to refuse to participate in the upcoming poll. According to a statement issued by the party, it was unconscionable to ask Dominicans to participate in another national election without at least a cleaned voters list and the issuance of national ID cards to all eligible voters. Quote, on the night when the country was expecting to hear the Prime Minister lead the call to support those affected, Mr. Skerritt decided to place his personal interest ahead of the country, the UWP press release read in part. Meanwhile, the Dominica Labour Party revealed its new-look slate of candidates in the community of Maho on Tuesday. Endorsees include 23-year-old Lakia Joseph for the constituency of Pebush, an example of the youthful face the party is putting forward for this election. With no organized opposition to stand against her, Joseph and the rest of the DLP slate look set to breeze into office.